Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Onepeg. So today we ended up having a conversation about some legal stuff with Dark and Darker Ironmace and that of Nexon. Somebody made a comment, and this is what basically the video is about, and there was a live portion of this that I'm going to play after I kind of preface this. There was a comment that was made about my bias in the last news video that I posted having to do with the legal stuff. I tend to be a little bit more biased toward that of Ironmace than Nexon. I have no qualms about that whatsoever. Personally, I am well within the fence of that of Ironmace for the time being, only because I believe that Ironmace has a stronger position and they have a better argument than that of Nexon. I think Nexon's position, even though they have allegations and they have accusations that they have made, so far, they have yet to prove. However, it is very possible that everything that they're saying, the majority of which, the major points, are things that are accurate. And if they are, I'll be the first person to make sure that I cover those accuracies and react as such, react accordingly. As soon as somebody's found guilty of anything, I will be the first person to say, wow, they got found guilty. That's insane. That changes everything. Because it would. In the meantime, though, I'm giving Ironmace the benefit of the doubt. But there were some interesting pieces of information that were brought up in some comments in my last YouTube video by a couple of different users. And I want to make sure that I give those pieces of information credence, because I think it's important to have these types of conversations, but it's also important to look at the larger picture involved. And I do go down a little bit of an ADHD hyperfocus hole here in the midst of the live stream. But if you guys would like to be part of those conversations, I would encourage you all to stop by when I'm live at Twitch, at twitch.tv/onepeg, where I'm live around 7 to 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Otherwise, if you're not a subscriber here, please consider subscribing to the channel because it really does matter. Once again, though, thank you guys so much for watching my videos. It means the world to me that you guys are here. It really, really does. I cannot thank you enough for watching my stuff. Thank you so much for being here. And anyway, on to the remainder of the live stuff. Thanks. What's the chance of a playtest early access if the case gets thrown out of U.S. court tomorrow? It won't move that fast. There would be a filing made by Steam right away for sure. They would file with Steam right away to show like the case was vacated with a copy of the order from the judge vacating the case, you know, all that stuff. I don't think that the motion to dismiss is going to be finalized tomorrow. I think the judge is going to make a decision on whether or not a stay is going to be granted on the discovery process by tomorrow, because they're supposed to get together tomorrow and have that actual meeting. So I have a feeling like the conversation about that is going to happen like just prior to, or like today, or, you know, something prior to having that actual meeting. So there's gonna be some oral argument there, and then I would anticipate that if it doesn't have a stay granted, then they'll look at the motion after that, probably get something on the calendar, because they're also going to be sitting in front of the judge. So if they're sitting right there in front of the judge is going to have her calendar right in front of her, and she'll be able to tell them when they can have the next hearing. So if EA drops with a supported pack, I'm tossing money at it immediately. Oh, dude, I'll buy 5 copies. I'll buy 5 copies and give away 4. Are you kidding me? Those guys will be mega funded the moment it goes into early access, which is exactly what Nexon is trying to avoid, because they want to squeeze, like, part of the strategy would be to squeeze Ironmace out, right? Like if it were me, you know, Art of War, Sun Tzu shit, cut off the supply lines in this case being cash. So they do have outside investors, if I'm not mistaken. Money's not quite a big concern. Money's always a concern, because the outside investors can pull out whenever they want. You know, they could back out whenever they damn well want to. So I wouldn't say that, right? They've been able to afford things up until this point. They probably have a certain amount of runway, but that doesn't mean that they have years, you know? An outside investor isn't going to give them like a year, 2, 3 worth of like VC cash for the purpose of fighting it in court. But whichever investor they did get either came before the court case started or is involved with the court case up until a certain point. It could be, you know, they gave them, you know, $500,000 worth of VC cash. But again, like, that's not going to go that far. You know what I mean? When you got 30 devs working on a project like this, even if it's in South Korea, even if it's, you know, let's say economically speaking, like the dollar's stretched a little bit further in Korea than it is like in the actual States, even with all of that being true, or maybe 5 or 10 of them are interns, I have no idea. But even if all of that were true and they were running skeleton crew shit and being super cost conscientious, if the United States court case continues, like, that money is going to be siphoned off faster than they have ever seen before, because the attorneys that they've got working on this case are not inexpensive. Like, Aaron Moss is a fucking rock star, which means he demands a rock star hourly rate. So, dude, did I tell you guys he followed me on Twitter? What happens if they win in U.S. and not Korea? If Korea has an injunction against Ironmace for whatever reason, if they have a preliminary injunction found against Ironmace stops, because the PI would tell them to stop producing the game, or whatever the terms of the PI were. They'd have to abide it, otherwise there'd be fees or something. I don't know. Maybe they'd have to pay like fines to the court. I have no idea. I mean, assuming that they listen to the PI, which I would assume that they would do, the entire production of the game would halt. So like the U.S. case is important, but it's only important in the sense that like it's going to ease up on the wallet for Ironmace. They're still going to have to battle it in court in Korea, and it's going to be a long time. But if they win, the big most important thing is whether or not they win the injunction against Nexon in Korea. Because if they win that, and the case in the United States gets vacated, then if both of those things happen, it's very likely that the game goes back up on Steam. It's also very likely that Nexon's counsel already has an appeal drafted in case they lose on the dismissal case or on the dismissal request. So if the motion's granted for forum nonconvenience, then these guys will already have an appeal drafted, and they will like literally submit the appeal like within minutes. It's like somebody will be like waiting at the clerk's counter to just go, there, done. And I don't know how Steam will handle that. Because technically speaking, the case is done. Case dismissed, motion granted, whatever, case dismissed. If that happens, they're going to appeal right away, but the case is still technically dismissed. The appeal just goes in to see if it needs to be reopened or not. I don't know how Steam will handle that. It could be that Steam puts the game back up for a little while, and then if the case gets reopened, they get notified, Steam takes it back down again. I have no idea. That appeal would take a month or two. Ironmace would need to create their status quo. Well, I think the status quo is already kind of being established right now, right? Like they haven't stopped producing the game, to the effect that Nexon is still bitching that they haven't stopped producing the game. So like they're still going until, and I would too, until somebody tells me that I have to stop. I'm not stopping. Fuck you. Right? Like they just have to keep a record of everything that they've done and are doing. So, but yeah, they haven't, I don't think they've monetized it. I think if it were me, I think that Aaron is likely telling Ironmace that they have a very, very solid footing for this motion to be granted. I think that Aaron is telling his clients that he believes that this motion is going to be granted, which means I don't think Ironmace is pursuing doing something through like Zola or like having their own launcher or whatever to monetize the game, because I think that they're pretty confident that it'll be going back up on Steam. That's how it feels. I could be completely wrong, and maybe like tomorrow they end up saying like, oh, we got our own launcher coming out. Obviously we don't know. Anybody's guess. It's anybody's guess. I can tell you that I have a very good rapport with the devs. I can send them DMs and they will respond to me even now, but I don't pester them, but I could send it. If I wrote that message to Terry or SDF or to Grayson or whatever and was like, hey, are you guys looking at this? They won't tell me because they can't. They're not going to show their hand because they know that I would tell people, right? Like, and I think that's fair. And even if they didn't think I would, I think that it's just too risky for them to bother saying any of that to anyone, and it should just stay between them and their attorney. It wasn't even trying to make a flex. I'm just saying, like, if anybody could get an answer, it's probably me that could get an answer from them, and they're not going to tell me. Was it not even trying to flex? I apologize. I wasn't trying to make it sound like that. I'm just saying, like, if I could ask the question, they're just not going to tell me. And if they were going to give anybody an answer, it'd probably be me or like Jonah or like Spud. Spud, same thing. Yeah, Spuddy could ask him too, but again, they're not going to tell him either. At the end of the day, the game's more than just a game. It's people's livelihoods stop working. Yeah, I mean, like, they'll probably take that into account, you know? But again, like, the question comes down to whether or not their livelihoods that they are generating off of the game is the livelihood as the result of people having stolen something, or is it off of, like, its own merit? Right? And that's really what the court case is about, because, like, of course you want people to be able to make their own money and, like, feed their families, pay their bills from the things that they're doing, working on, you know, all that stuff. But if it is based on theft, then, you know, while you sympathize, it doesn't matter, right? But they still have to prove that, and there hasn't been any actual proof. Actually, we could even talk about this. So there was one thing that I kind of glazed over a little bit that I should have looked closer at. Let's see. I think it's 40. Is this the email? Yeah, okay. So there's a translated email. So in one of the things that I kind of glossed over a little bit and probably shouldn't have, that somebody made a comment about in my last YouTube video, and there was some back and forth. So long and short of it is, like, people have said, like, are you ever going to say anything about Nexon and, like, whether or not they have a solid case, you know, or are you just going to stay biased forever, right? Like, that's what I got that from people. And it's like, okay, whatever. My response to that was, I'm biased in the sense that I don't feel as though Nexon has a very strong case. They have very strong accusations. They have very severe accusations, and they're well within their right to pursue whatever legal recourse they feel is necessary for themselves. But I don't know if they necessarily have proof. And that's the hard part, because while they could say that people took files from them, and that I think is pretty much like agreed upon, there are files that were taken by, I guess, a few different parties at this point that are all working for Ironmace now. There isn't any proof that that paper trail extends into Ironmace as a company, and it doesn't prove that it extended any further than when, like, Choi deleted the shit off of his servers, right? And then what happened was is that people are saying, well, Nexon has a very strong point, and that Ironmace ended up making some material like oopsies. They have like these minor screw ups in the things that they've said, and therefore like people think that they're guilty, and that's fine. What I would say is that for all of the minor screw ups or whatever that are in the documentation that Ironmace submitted, I would argue that Nexon has equally as many, if not more so, and I believe that they're more severe in the sense that in their initial complaint they submitted copies of screenshots and said that those screen caps were of Project P3, and one of them absolutely was not. One of them absolutely provably is of Dark and Darker, and they claimed it was Project P3, which is a huge mistake. They claimed that Terry Park had a residence in California. Park hasn't been in California in 15 years and has never owned real property in California. They named the what they consider to be the English-speaking language Twitter account for Ironmace games, and it's not. The Dark and Darker EN Twitter account is a fan account, and James Blackburn made a declaration saying that that was evidence of their Western world-facing Twitter account. It's not an Ironmace Twitter account. It's a fan account. The @Ironmace Games account is the only one that they have, and that one has double the following of the fan account. There's a lot of things that they have said, and then there was this claim that Nexon made about how Ironmace wouldn't give them the source code, but it turns out that Ironmace could actually make a formal request, and they just chose not to, but neglected to bother to like mention that. They neglected mentioning that at all, and instead just said that Ironmace wouldn't give it to them. Which why give them anything that they don't have to? Why would I hand somebody ammunition to use against me? That doesn't make any sense. Just make the formal request in court, and I'll abide by the formal request. But they tried to say that it was too time-consuming and isn't typically done at this phase. But that's only after it was challenged. So they have multiple times misrepresented like material things that they have said. My argument here is that if you're going to say that Ironmace is being disingenuous, or if they're being veiled in their responses, you could easily say that Nexon is doing the exact same thing, because again, the name of the game is only to show as much as you need to, and you're going to provide as much bias in your tale that you're telling as you can get away with in court. Both sides are going to do that. But what they said in one of the comments, somebody responded and said that this email from a statement that was made by the manager that oversaw Choi and Park, the guy that okayed Choi to work from home and then said that he didn't have permission anymore. There's an email, a brief email correspondence trail here. And the argument was, well, if the game wasn't greenlit, if it was greenlit, wasn't greenlit, then why does this email exist saying that the game can move into early access? So this says, Dear Ju-Huan, we will consider prototyping done and enter pre-production for P3. Okay. Accordingly, I will start accumulating development costs for root unit projects, taking into consideration characteristics. Please note they will remain as root unit teams. I would like to give the project its own name. We can name it for now, create a project code, blah, blah, blah. Please move quickly so that it could be released to the public via early access this November. I take it the team under Ju-Huan Choi also feels the need for a prompt release. Please also take this into account when coming up with the schedule. So this was written in May 11th, right? So they're saying release in November, 6 months later. Now, at this point, the game had been in development for 1.5 years, right? So you still have a 6-month runway, right? Out of 2 years, if 6 months of that full 2 years, you got 25% of the timeline to, an early access release, let's say. 6 months is a long time, and it is a full 2 months, more than 2 months. It's like 7 weeks or so before they end up actually firing, because I think it's 21st of July is when they fired. So it's like 7.5 weeks before they got rid of Choi, right? This is what ADHD looks like. Yeah, you're welcome. All the details that my ultra forgetful mind will have as a steel trap for no fucking reason. But if we're putting this together, okay, you have 6 weeks, 7.5 weeks of time frame where something goes wrong between this and then, right? And it could be that he marketed the game outside. It could be that he was going to take the idea and run. It could be the internal meetings that he had with people. It could be that the leadership of production, maybe somebody higher up than this guy ended up saying that the project wasn't going to go anywhere. It could be a multitude of reasons. But their argument was the game was greenlit because they mentioned going to early access release, okay? However, none of this, even when it goes into pre-production, none of that is external externally facing. So if we go and I pull up the initial complaint. Okay, so in the initial complaint, the stages of game development are divided into pitching, prototyping, pre-production, production, post-production, and launch. Okay, so where we are, by the time that they say we're leaving the prototyping stage and going into pre-production, that's phase 3 of 6. All right, launch being live. Okay, pre-production. They talk about, so pitching stage, right? Then it goes to prototyping, pre-production. Depending on the result of prototyping, management approves the kickoff of the project and it enters pre-production. At this stage, the team identifies the direction of game development, sends quantitative targets and detailed development plans, and plans distribution and servicing. The completed playable version of the game undergoes testing. The prototyping stage and pre-production stage usually takes 6 months to a year. So even if they were looking to get it toward early access, they haven't even gotten to the point where they're talking about in-house alpha testing, external alpha and beta testing. Like, getting it to early access in 6 months was extremely ambitious. Even if they were able to hit that target date, there is a ton of shit that could have happened inside of that 2-month period between when that conversation, that email happened, and when Choi ended up getting released that put a sour taste in his mouth over something. And anybody could have flipped on that opinion at any point in time in between, because it is a far fucking cry from being anywhere close to marketable and like people paying money for it or early access or any of that shit. So the argument that they had tried to make, that somebody made, was that because of this email existing, it showed that the game was greenlit. The game was only allowed to go into like the next phase. And at some point in between, something ended up going wrong. Because let's face it, if SDF and Park and everybody else were happy with how things were going, why would they bother leaving to begin with? Greed isn't enough of a motivator when you feel that when you figure that the company is going to pull what it did and put liens on all of your shit and try to take you to criminal court. Like, none of that shit is worth it. Greed wasn't enough. So there had to have been something else. It doesn't make sense otherwise. Because they could have taken any one of the projects and done any of that. They had a dozen other projects before this that all got shit canned at the point in time that they were at this phase where it was in pre-production or before. So it just doesn't jive. You know what I mean? So like, and that's what I'm saying. Like, the argument that they're trying to make to say like that email is a smoking gun, regardless, still doesn't prove that anything was actually stolen and like kept. Because if he says that he deleted everything, you got to prove him wrong. Like, okay, so tell him that he's lying. Figure it out. Like, you got to prove that he's lying. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's yeah, doesn't make sense. So yeah, I'm biased, but I'm biased for good reason.